There are those special moments in life when the forbidden looks far more alluring than it should. For me, that moment came on a hot July afternoon. I went out to my back porch and caught sight of Alan swimming in the pool. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the rippling water. His broad shoulders cut through the water, as if he were meant to be there, as if the water was made for him. The water lapped at his skin, highlighting the definition of his chest, his arms, his back. I felt my breath catch, and in that second, I wasn't a grieving widow, a mother, or even a woman in her 50s. I was just a woman. I should have turned around, gone back inside, and pretended I hadn't seen him, but I didn't. After all, Alan was more than just a man. He was my son-in-law, and he had been married to my daughter Sophie for almost 3 years. They were the picture-perfect couple, young, ambitious, and in love. Or so I thought. Sophie had always been my pride and joy, my world, especially after my husband passed away 5 years ago. I'd poured my heart and soul into her, making sure she had the life I couldn't give her anymore. But in that moment, none of that mattered. It had been years since anyone had looked at me the way Alan looked at Sophie. I hadn't felt the warmth of someone's touch or the comfort of their arms in years. Loneliness had become an unwelcome guest in my life, one I couldn't seem to get rid of. As I stood there, gripping the railing, I found myself staring longer than I should have. Alan turned and caught sight of me. He smiled, his white teeth sparkling against his dark skin, and raised a hand in greeting. "Hey, Mom," he called out, his voice warm and comforting. "Water's perfect. You should join me sometime." I laughed awkwardly, shaking my head. "I'll leave that to you young folks. Enjoy yourself." I retreated into the house, my heart pounding. What was wrong with me? This was Alan, Sophie's husband, for God's sake. I buried myself in housework, trying to distract my mind, but the image of him kept creeping back. The way his muscles moved under his skin, the easy confidence in his smile. As time went on, I found myself thinking about that afternoon more and more. I started finding excuses to spend more time outside when Alan was around. Watering the plants, reading a book by the pool, anything to steal a glance. I told myself it was harmless. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wanted to look. But as time went on, I found myself looking more and more. One evening, I was washing dishes in the kitchen while Alan was grilling burgers outside. The glass doors gave me a perfect view of him standing shirtless by the grill, flipping burgers with practiced ease. Sophie was inside, minding her own business on her phone, completely unaware of the magnetic pull her husband had on me. I felt a pang of guilt for being drawn to him. I couldn't help but feel my heart race when he laughed, and my skin tingled when he brushed past me. But I couldn't stop myself. It was as if some invisible force had taken over, a force I couldn't fight. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, overcome with guilt. I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of mother am I to feel this way about my daughter's husband? What kind of woman was I? But the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it grew. I knew I was walking a dangerous path. I just didn't know how to stop. The tension between Alan and me had been growing, subtle and unspoken, but undeniable. Every glance felt charged, every interaction laced with an undercurrent we both pretended not to notice. It all came to a head during a family barbecue. Sophie had invited a few friends, and the backyard was filled with the joyous hum of conversation and the mouth-watering smell of grilled food. Alan, as always, was working his magic at the grill, flipping burgers and steaks with his signature dependability. I stayed in the background, setting out plates and drinks, trying to focus on anything but him. But then came the moment I had been dreading and secretly yearning for. The guests had left, and Sophie excused herself to take a phone call upstairs. I was tidying up the kitchen after dinner when Alan came in. He was barefoot, wearing a fitted t-shirt and shorts, his skin still glistening faintly from the heat of the grill. "Do you need any help?" he asked, leaning casually against the counter. I shook my head, looking away. "I've got it. You should relax." He didn't move. Instead, he picked up a dish towel and began drying the plates I'd washed. "Mom, I can't let you do all the work. You've done so much for us already." His words were simple, even kind, but the way he said, "Mom," sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was respect or something else. "Thank you, Alan," I whispered, my eyes still on the sink. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels heavier than it should. I felt him looking at me, and when I finally turned, our eyes met. "I feel like you've been avoiding me," he said softly, his tone laced with curiosity and something deeper. My heart pounded. "What? No, of course not. I've just been busy." "Busy watching me swim?" Those words hit me like a bolt from the blue. My mouth went dry, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. He moved closer, just enough to bridge the gap between us without actually touching. "I've noticed," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "the way you look at me. I'm not imagining it, am I?" I should have denied it, laughed it off, done anything to put an end to this madness. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on him. "Alan, this is wrong," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. "Then tell me to stop." But before I could respond, his lips met mine in a passionate kiss. It wasn't gentle, but it was urgent, hungry, as if he had been holding back for far too long. My hands instinctively sought his chest, but instead of pulling away, I found myself gently holding onto his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss ended as suddenly as it had begun, and we were both breathless. "This can't happen," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But it already has," he replied, his eyes searching mine. I felt like running away, locking myself in my room and pretending this never happened. But the truth was, I didn't want it to stop. The loneliness I had been feeling for years was suddenly replaced by something intoxicating, something I hadn't felt in decades. The sound of Sophie's laughter upstairs jolted us both back to reality. Alan took a step back, his expression showing a mix of emotions. "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," I said, shaking my head. "We need to forget this ever happened." But even as I said the words, I knew it was a lie. The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. Guilt, excitement, fear, and even something dangerously close to desire. I had told myself that the kiss with Alan was a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. One evening, Sophie went out with friends, leaving Alan and me alone in the house. I had planned to steer clear of Alan, to spend the night in my room with a good book and lock the door if I had to. But, you know how it is, fate, or my own recklessness had other plans. I was in the living room folding laundry when Alan walked in. He was wearing sweatpants and a tank top, his muscles taut and gleaming from a recent workout. "You're still up?" he asked, his voice low and casual. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my eyes on the pile of clothes in front of me. He plopped down on the couch, right next to me, and I could feel his warmth radiating from him. "Me neither," I replied, feeling the tension in the air. The air between us felt charged, like the calm before a storm. I tried to focus on folding a towel, but my hands trembled, betraying me. "Mom," he said gently, his voice breaking the silence. "We need to talk about what happened." I froze, holding the towel tightly in my hands. "Alan, there's nothing to talk about. It was a mistake. It won't happen again." "But it will," he said, leaning closer. "You know it will." I looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something in his eyes, a depth, a yearning, that made it impossible to look away. Before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Alan, this is wrong." "Then tell me you don't want this," he challenged, his voice firm but gentle. I couldn't. In an instant, his lips met mine, and I melted into the moment. The kiss was slow and deliberate, and it was clear that neither of us could deny the urgency any longer. I felt his hands on my shoulders, gently guiding me closer. We didn't notice the sound of Sophie's car pulling into the driveway. When the front door opened, we jumped apart, my heart pounding as Alan stood and adjusted his shirt. I quickly gathered the laundry, pretending to be engrossed in folding as Sophie walked in. "Hey, guys," she said cheerfully, kicking off her shoes. "What are you two doing up so late?" "Just folding some laundry," I replied, smiling warmly. "Alan was keeping me company." She smiled, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "You're the best, Mom. Thank you so much for helping out." I watched her kiss Alan on the cheek, and my chest tightened with guilt. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments and close calls. Alan and I became pros at hiding our secret romance, meeting in hotel rooms, sneaking kisses when Sophie wasn't paying attention, and exchanging glances that said so much. But the guilt was always there, a constant shadow that grew heavier with each passing day. Every time I saw Sophie smile or heard her laugh, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. One afternoon, as I sat in my bedroom, I thought about my late husband. He had been a good man, a loving father, and a devoted husband. What would he think of me now? Would he hate me for betraying our daughter? Or would he understand the loneliness that had driven me to this point? I didn't know how he would react, and that uncertainty only made me feel more guilty. But Alan, my boyfriend, seemed unfazed. If anything, he grew bolder, even texting me during the day and finding excuses to touch me whenever we were alone. One evening, as we sat together in the backyard, he turned to me and said, "I think I'm falling for you." His words hit me like a freight train. "Alan, please don't," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't love. This is something else." "But what if it is?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were spiraling out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. I thought we were careful. Every stolen glance, every fleeting touch, and every whispered conversation felt like a secret perfectly hidden. But secrets, no matter how well kept, have a way of surfacing when you least expect it. It started with Sophie's questions. They were small at first, innocent enough to dismiss, but pointed enough to make my stomach twist into knots. "Mom, have you noticed Alan acting strange?" she asked one morning over coffee. I kept my face neutral, stirring cream into my mug. "Strange? How do you mean?" "I don't know. He's been distracted lately. He's been acting a bit even distant." I gave a casual shrug, trying to sound friendly. "Maybe it's work stress. You know how demanding his job can be." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Yeah, maybe." Her suspicions hung in the air, and I felt like I couldn't shake them. I felt like I needed to end things with Alan because I felt like it was the only way to salvage what little morality I had left. But every time I thought I was going to end it, he'd find me, and his eyes would show how much he needed me, and his touch would make me feel things I couldn't deny. One evening, Sophie said she was going to visit a friend overnight. The moment she left, Alan and I were alone again, and the tension between us was palpable. "We shouldn't," I whispered as he moved closer, his hands gently tracing the outline of my waist. "But you don't want me to stop, do you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I let him pull me into a kiss that erased all my doubts, if only for a moment. The next morning, I woke up in my bed alone. Alan had slipped out before sunrise, careful not to leave any trace. I sat up, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like a physical force. I didn't hear Sophie come home, but I heard her scream. I hurried down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Sophie was in the living room, her phone clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice gentle. I asked, my voice quivering. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of rage and devastation. "You? How could you?" My heart dropped. "Sophie, I don't understand," I said, my voice gentle. She held up her phone, and my stomach dropped. There, on the screen, was a series of photos. Alan and me in the backyard, our faces inches apart, the kiss unmistakable. "Sophie, I can explain," I said, my voice gentle. "Explain?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How do you explain betraying your own daughter? How do you justify sleeping with my husband?" My eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't try to defend myself. What could I say? She was right. I felt like a monster. "You disgust me," she spat, throwing the phone onto the couch. "I trusted you, Mom. I trusted him, and this is what you do to me." "Sophie, please," I begged, reaching for her. She took a step back, her head shaking. Don't you dare touch me." Her words hit me harder than any slap ever could. I watched as she hurried upstairs, slamming the door behind her. Later that evening, Alan came home, not knowing about the ups and downs of the day. He walked in smiling, but his face fell when he saw me sitting on the couch, my face streaked with tears. "She knows," I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes widened. "What? How?" "She has pictures, Alan. Someone saw us and sent them to her." His face paled, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "What should we do?" I shook my head, my face a picture of concern. "I'm not sure either. I don't know how to fix this." At that moment, Sophie came downstairs, her suitcase in hand. She didn't even look at me as she walked past, her face set in stone. "Sophie, wait," Alan said, stepping toward her. She turned on him, her voice sharp as a blade. "Don't. I'm done with you, Alan. I'm through with both of you. She walked out the door, slamming it behind her. The house was silent after that, a quiet that felt like a punishment in itself. Alan and I sat in the living room, neither of us saying a word. Maybe it's for the best, he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. For the best? I echoed, my voice quivering with emotion. We destroyed her, Alan. We destroyed everything. He didn't say anything. What could he say? The days after Sophie left were the darkest I've ever known. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. Alan and I barely spoke, each of us consumed by our own guilt and shame. Every time I passed by Sophie's empty room, I felt the weight of my betrayal threatening to crush me. I really wanted to call her, like 100 times. I even picked up the phone and dialed her number once, but when it went straight to voicemail, I hung up, too cowardly to leave a message. Alan tried his best to be strong for us both, doing what he could to make things seem normal. But I knew better. There was no going back, no undoing what we'd done. One evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The crisp night air felt like a small reprieve from the suffocating guilt that followed me everywhere. As I strolled through the peaceful streets of our neighborhood, I found myself thinking about my late husband. I whispered to the darkness, "I'm sorry, John. I failed you. I failed her." When I returned home, Alan was waiting for me in the living room. He looked a bit upset. His jaw was tight. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded and took a seat across from him. "I think I'm going to leave," he said, his voice low. "It's for the best, I'm sure. Sophie won't come back as long as I'm here, and I can't keep doing this." His words stung a little, but I knew he was right. Our affair had been a mistake from the start, a toxic combination of loneliness and desire that had spiraled out of control. "I think you should go," I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, and for the first time in weeks, there was an understanding between us. He stood, paused for a moment, and then leaned down to kiss my forehead. "Take care of yourself," he said, and then he was gone. The house felt empty without Alan. I threw myself into cleaning, trying to scrub away the memories of what had happened. But no matter how hard I worked, the guilt remained, an unshakable shadow. One night, I sat down at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I stared at the blank email screen for what felt like hours before finally typing Sophie's address into the recipient field. The words came slowly, each one feeling like a confession, a plea, and a cry for forgiveness all at once. "Dear Sophie, I'm not sure if you'll ever see this, but I feel like I need to say something. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I realize there's no excuse, no justification for my actions. I let my own loneliness and weakness cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I hurt the person I love most in the world. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But what I can promise you is that I carry your loss with me every single day, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry. You're my daughter, my pride, my joy, and I betrayed that. If I could go back and undo everything, I would. Please take care of yourself, and if you ever feel ready to talk, I'll be here waiting." I hit send and sat back, the weight of the confession lifting ever so slightly. Weeks turned into months. Sophie didn't reply to the email, but I didn't expect her to. I heard through mutual friends that she was staying with a colleague and focusing on her career. Knowing she was doing well gave me a small measure of peace, even if it didn't erase the ache of her absence. As for Alan, I never saw him again. He moved out of state, leaving behind only memories and a string of bad decisions. One quiet evening, as I sat alone in the backyard, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. The affair with Alan had absolutely devastated my life, but it also forced me to confront the loneliness and grief I had been avoiding since John's death. I knew it would be a journey, and it would be tough, but I had to do it if I wanted to find peace again. I whispered to the night, "I'll do better. For her. For her." If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more heartfelt tales of love, betrayal, and redemption.